Hi, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre with the Business Infrastructure Podcast, and I have with me my good friend, Jason Smith. He's going to offer insights about today's episode from a sales and visionary perspective. Jason, this interview with Maria Jones seems so fundamental to laying the foundation to knowing and exploring all things COO. I'm curious, what were your thoughts about this show?
Yeah, thanks so much. And again, I really like this episode because she highlights something that's important. The COO is critical to getting things done as much as the CEO is casting vision and setting the strategy. It's the COO that has to make it happen. And the reason why they're peers is you need that kind of godlike power to enforce those kind of get it done principles. But for the COO to survive nowadays, they're really going to have to attach themselves to growing and generating revenue more so than their traditional roles of hiring, firing, and reducing costs. That's the future of COOs, if you ask me.
And that's so critical, not being known as the person to cut expenses, but as a person that's actually adding to the bottom line, bringing in that revenue. Thank you so much, Jason. Let's go ahead and start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, Alicia Butler-Pierre.
Today's episode is brought to you by Equilibria Incorporated, an operations management firm giving fast-growing companies tools to increase their capacity with less chaos. Learn more at eqbsystems.com. This season, we're focusing on the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. And joining me today from Atlanta, Georgia, is Maria Jones. We're going to talk about what a COO is, why the role is so important, and some key metrics that can help you run your business better. Be sure to stick around to the end of the show because I'm going to tell you how you can ask me a question that you may have about operations and get it answered here live on the show. Maria, welcome. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I am thrilled because you are quite the operations person, I must say. So I'm so excited about this for two reasons. One, because you actually own your business, but you have functioned as in some type of an operations capacity in several different industries. Your industry knowledge is very broad and very diverse, which I love. And secondly, because you're actually a director of the Atlanta chapter of the COO Forum. And we actually had Bill Shepard, who started the organization, on the show a few episodes back. And it's the perfect segue into starting off this season with you as one of the director of a chapter. We start off with you telling us first a little bit more about the COO Forum for those who may be hearing about it for the first time?
Absolutely. So the COO Forum is a peer-to-peer professional development experience. And what I mean by experience, it's really an experience whereby COOs can actually learn from one another. It goes back to the old adage of iron sharpens iron. And so with that, it's a good experience for others to really share knowledge, share new developments, and really have a confidential but a wealth of information to support the COO. And so what I always say about that experience is that there's only one COO at every company, right? The COO is not an accountant. They don't have another person at the company say, hey, what do you think about this? And so the COO Forum functions in that capacity and really aligns knowledge across the globe for all COOs.
Now, you also own your own company, which is Nerdy Industry. Can you tell more about that company and what you do there for your clients?
Sure. So I am the founder of Nerdy Industry. At Nerdy Industry, our focus is really to support the budding entrepreneur at any age. And so what I call my target market is the incidental entrepreneur. These are folks who have hobbies or cool talents and they have turned into businesses. And they're kind of in that initial period of, I really need to establish operations for my business, but I have no clue what this is. I just have this really great talent. or thing that I make. A good example of a customer is one who Aunt Sally at church makes a really great pie. The word has gotten out and stores are like, oh, we need to order some pies. We want to sell that through a bakery. And so Aunt Sally is like, okay, say I need contracts. They say I need an LLC or corp. They say I need an EIN. I don't know what to do. And so that's where nerdy industry comes into play. We actually work with budding entrepreneurs of all ages, actually have kidpreneurs as well, to set up their initial operations for their organization. And we work mostly through all industries. And not only do we kind of have a business advisory service, but we also service as a referral services for various needs for those entrepreneurs.
So it's almost as though, if this is a correct way of describing what you do, it's almost as though you're serving as a fractional COO for these budding entrepreneurs. Would that be a fair description?
That is a very accurate assessment. We
Okay.
are fractional COOs in that regard. And we're the first version of a COO that those companies actually see.
Ah, I like
Hmm.
that. I like that. And first of all, I applaud you for being able to work with startups because I've personally found it difficult because when companies are first starting up, the focus tends to be on the marketing and sales side. And,
Hmm.
and talking to these budding entrepreneurs, these startups can be a challenge when you're talking to them about operations and
Hmm.
getting all of that infrastructure in place. So, do you find that to be a challenge? Is it a hard sell?
It's an interesting exchange of discussion initially about operations, to say the least, right? And so, where I go with the conversation is, especially for budding entrepreneurs, my business started out kind of people just asking me questions. Oh, how do I do this and how do I do that? But the first point of them even working with nerdy industry is for them to understand where they're moving in their life with the business, right? Because it's one thing to do something as a hobby, and it's another thing to turn it into a business and what it means. And in order to have a business, you have to have operations. What I tell them and teach them is that operations is really the core of every business. It touches every part of your organization. It really births the product and or service, whatever they're providing to their customers. And if they don't have operations, then they don't have a product or service. And moreover, they don't have a business. And so that's kind of the very elementary discussion that we have. And it's good for them to understand that they do have an operation, but it's how do I scale that to the next level to make it a business?
Great point, because which is a really nice segue into something else that I wanted to talk about, which is just explaining to people what operations actually means. I'm still boggled, honestly, by some people, even owners of well established businesses, well established meaning they've been in business at least 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
And they
Absolutely.
still don't really understand what's meant by operations and
Hmm.
why it is so critical to have someone in place who's overlooking operations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, can you talk or speak to that for a little bit?
So, in my opinion, what I like to tell people is that operations is really the core. If I think of operations, it's really the piece that holds everything together. If you think of the physical human body, operations is the skin of that. It's the thing that's most overlooked, but it's also one of the most important pieces of the body. It holds everything together. If it's damaged, it has to regenerate and heal itself. And so operations really is the core of the business, and every portion of the business is touched by operations. You spoke to marketing, but one of the things which I find also common, that CEOs are very focused on marketing, which is fantastic. I love marketing. But there is operational components as part of a marketing plan. And so I have to really describe to everyone that when you have a business, the operations is the how of what you do.
Yes.
It
Yes.
is the how of your marketing. It is the how of your accounting. It is the how of your product development. It is the how of your service. And so if that how isn't succinctly in place and managed, it affects everything about your business that is revenue generating. So the customer experience. What do they say? The product itself, the service itself.
Yes. And I have to just share a really quick story, Maria, with our audience that's listening. What
Hmm.
I love about you, and I know we haven't known each other that long, but I was impressed with you from the first point of contact that I had with you. So for those of you listening, and depending on when you're listening, we are currently in the midst of the COVID-19, aka coronavirus outbreak.
Hmm.
And Maria scheduled an initial kickoff kind of meet and greet event for the Atlanta chapter of the COO Forum. And I believe this was on March 12th, 2020.
Correct.
It was scheduled first thing in the morning so that we
Hmm.
we could all get our day started and be able to go back to our respective offices after the meet and greet. And although I think it was over 100 people that had signed up, there were what, 6 to 7 of us that actually showed up. And it
Absolutely,
was,
give or take.
yes. And what was so interesting was that it was at that moment, from the moment that event ended, when I looked at my inbox, everything started getting canceled. All the meetings, all of the luncheons, all of the events, the workshops, the webinars, the conferences, speaking engagements, everything was just getting canceled. So I want to say kudos to you for putting that event together, because here's what I appreciated about what you did and how you set it up. I can always tell when someone is really good at processes and systems and operations and they can get into the details, when I have an amazing experience. Because I always tell people operations isn't necessarily seen, but it
Hmm.
is experienced, right? Every little detail, everything from the intake form that you had us sign up. There, we also, I remember, had to choose different days of the week and preferred times of day that we could possibly meet as a group. It was just awesome. And then once you arrived at the event, it was just evident that you're very organized, very methodical, that you thought through every single detail to create a memorable experience. So that's what I appreciate about you. And for those who are listening, this is what operations is all about. It's all of those nitty gritty details. But you've said a mouthful about why operations is so important. Can we talk about why it's so important to have someone in charge of operations in a business?
Fantastic. So for the COO role, it comes in many facets. It might have different names. You might have a chief strategy officer, but the key about the role is that the COO is the chief of operations and they are second in command to the CEO. So this is where it ties to our previous conversation. The CEO is the visionary. The COO is what I always reference this, the COOs are really the innovators of execution. And so these are the people that take the how and they innovate. How are we going to manifest this vision? How are we going to continuously manifest this vision? And as we speak to COVID-19 itself, one of the things that all COOs work on, and I think all CEOs have really seen the value in the partnership with their COOs, is how do we continue to manifest this business regardless of environmental factors? Changes in our environment, changes in our industry. How do we continue to manifest that vision of the CEO?
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, Maria, with your expansive background in operations, again, across so many different industries, I was looking up information about you, and you've worked in industries like healthcare and software and financial services. How do you communicate the value of operations with your clients? I know you've given us some insight already in explaining how operations is the core of your business and it's
Mhm.
one of the most overlooked aspects of a business. But is there anything else that you do specifically in communicating the value if you ever encounter any pushback?
Yeah, so I actually go back to something that you previously stated, which is the customer experience. Because operations is so ingrained in everything a company does, if the operations aren't good, the customers know, right? So if you have a lot of variation in product and they can't really feel the consistency and the experience, if they don't enjoy it, if they have bad experience, they have inconsistent experience, that is a reflection of operations. And I'll give you a good example. So most companies have a chief customer experience person or somebody really executive over the customer experience. That executive can have the greatest relationship with the customer. However, if they cannot deliver based on operations not being in place, you will not retain that customer. And so, just with that, operations is key. If you have a great relationship with the customer, but the customer can't depend on you to deliver your product and service on time in a dependable way and a certain level of quality, then you won't retain that customer.
That is for sure. And that alone should, you would think, would help bridge the gap between operations and sales. But unfortunately, we still find that those two groups can function in silos.
This is true.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I remember years ago I was working with a client, and one of the VPs, she was on the sales, she was actually on the operations side, and she was talking about another VP, and she said, "Yeah, he sells the dream, but then I have to deal with the nightmare." Meaning I have to, you know,
Yeah.
if they're going out there and making all of these different promises, she now has to figure out operationally, how are we actually going to deliver on that promise?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So
And to speak to that, I think that is where the COO role is supremely important because they have to shepherd the relationships internally of an organization to continuously deliver. Because if the sales team is out there selling things that don't align to operations, again, that goes to customer experience or, churning your organization because you have employees who are so frustrated with recreating or backpedaling or just not having a great experience with the service or product that they're trying to produce or the ever changing product that it still impacts the customer experience. And so I think that's where the COO role is actually extremely pivotal is because they can be the liaison among all of the organization because they touch the entire organization. One of the key things that I try to ingrain in all of my customers is that operations is part of every part of your organization. And so a great chief operations officer actually is going to know about sales and be a partner in sales process, right? They're
mhm.
going to know marketing, they're going to be a partner in not necessarily what the marketing approach is, but what are the operations related to your marketing approach? Can we make this a little bit more efficient? And so that role is very pivotal.
Absolutely. Now, if we can at this time, I'd like to try to tie all of this good stuff that we're talking about as it relates to operations to business infrastructure. And for those of you who are listening to this show for the first time, business infrastructure is a system for linking your people, processes, and tools to ensure that growth happens in a profitable and sustainable way. Maria, can you share with us an example of a successful and or high profile project that you worked on that involved improving operations, maybe for one of your clients, if you can talk about it without revealing maybe to, any sensitive information?
Sure. So, with in light of COVID-19, I think what has been the most concern of all business is what is our business continuity plan? How are we going to
Yes.
survive this change in our environment, this stoppage in our business? This is not going to fit our model. How are we going to continue on? So, one of my customers is they're a small food service company. They have about 30 FTEs. And so, one of the things that you all know, a lot of our locations now are on lockdown, whereby restaurants, events are closed.
Yeah.
This service industry is really hurting because they have really had to recreate their business in a certain way. So, as you guys may be aware, a lot of these businesses can do curbside service, they can do delivery. So, it's a total shift in their business.
Hmm.
And a lot of businesses that I'm learning, especially as a participant on the COO forum, is that businesses have not really honed in on their business continuity plan. And
Yes.
so this is the time also
Yes.
where the chief operating officer, I keep telling people, they are the chief of business continuity. They really have to innovate the operations to keep the business going. And so one of the things that we actually utilized is that we looked at the business and said, okay, based on where we are today and what we have to change in light of certain populations kind of needing to not work for a certain amount of time of our employee staff, the actual business being shifted to, they actually had a catering business in place, had some relationships that they could expand upon, and they did. And so their continuity plan was, okay, we're going to shift a lot of our business and transition a lot of things to our catering side of the business. And so they did have some structure for that. So what we did was we actually utilized a volume stream mapping with the support of their staff. And so basically what that means, for everyone who may not be knowledgeable of that, that means looking at their entire process and saying, okay, what is our process? What are the most valuable steps? And where may we have waste in our process that we can eliminate? Wasteful energies, wasteful resources, wasteful use of staffing. And so with that, we also did some process re-engineering of their operations. And so with the process re-engineering, we actually shifted some of those FTEs to other roles that was going to support more so of the catering business. So they had to do some minor shifts in their actual positions, which, because the staff actually participated in this process, they were happy to do. Now, the results of that is that the staff was able to retain 100% of their staff for 1 quarter. And they have, due to cost savings of that, they were able to reduce their projected revenue loss from 82% to only 20 for that quarter.
Oh, wow. And how long did it take to implement this? So from the moment that you went in and helped them map out the entire process, figure out what their contingency plan, what their continuity plan is going to look like. So from the moment you were helping them plan to actual execution, how long was that?
I would say it was about 5 days, but the only
Wow.
reason that was very successful was because, one, the culture of the organization was very good in a way that the staff were always supported and encouraged to be part of innovation at the organization. And so, with that, they knew the severity of the situation that we are in with the coronavirus. They understood the impact that it could have on the business, and they were willing to be part of that innovation and willing to swiftly make those changes. And so with that, they really understood that. They were really contributors to the change versus in many situations, people are detractors from the change. And so that is the way that that was implemented so quickly. Usually it is not that way, but
Right.
yeah, yeah. And so that was really the key factors on the swiftness of that change.
And Maria, I'm going to try to say this as politically correctly as I can, but the pandemic that we're experiencing right now is absolutely horrific. It's very tragic. It's also a very good time for those of us in operations because we've been standing on
Absolutely.
our soapboxes for so long saying you need to plan, you need to think ahead, we need to strip waste, we need to have these contingency plans, we need to have
Mm-hmm.
disaster recovery plans in place,
Mm-hmm.
business continuity. And you don't want to paint these pictures of doom and gloom, but you
Sure.
kind of have to start thinking, well, what if something does go wrong? What if there is a pandemic? What if there's theft, fire,
Mm-hmm.
flood,
Absolutely.
hurricanes, tornadoes, natural disasters? So you want to try to think through these different scenarios to your point so that you can adapt and adapt very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we come out on the other side of this, I think our respective businesses are really just we're going to have a different type of problem. We're going to have more business than we can handle.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I say with every tragedy, there is something learned. And so with this time, I think what my clientele has learned is, oh, we have to really invest in our operations. We need a person here that if something happens, we really need somebody that can really do this for us. In my business, I am a fractional COO, as most people would say. But I always encourage when my clients get their business to a certain level that they need to hire a full-time COO because, again, these are the innovators of execution. And when your business gets complex, you're always innovating and you're always looking to execute and prepare to continue to execute regardless of other factors.
Well said. Now, can we touch really quickly on some of the metrics that you think are really important in monitoring and reporting? And this maybe what we can do is tie that into the specific example that you just shared with us, because I know that's a very unfair question, right? Is to ask from a very generic standpoint, what are some key metrics? But as it relates to that food service company, what
Sure.
were some of the key metrics that you all monitored?
So, with regard to metrics and that one, these metrics kind of tie. So, one of the metrics that I always tell my customers to monitor is customer satisfaction on a 3 point scale. Some people do five, I do three. The reason that I do three is because one and two don't count. And so, on that 3 point scale, you're looking at it as one, the customer is not happy. Two, it's like, oh, it's a so so experience, whatever. And then three is like, oh, yeah, I liked it. I really liked it. I had a great experience. Like I would recommend this person, this business, this
Mhm.
this service, right? And so with that, I say this ties to any operations. You always want to keep that customer satisfaction at a three. If you're operating at a two or a one, you got a lot of operations work to do. A lot of times, I would say key things in operations to watch with customer satisfaction is consistency. Is your quality consistent? Is your delivery consistent? Is everything uniform with what you're delivering on every occasion? And can you replicate that experience every time? So that's on customer satisfaction. Another very important satisfaction statistic is employee satisfaction. And so I know that a lot of organizations look at, oh, well, we do an annual review and then we take this data. But when you're really in a great operations organization and that's focused on operational excellence, you need committed partners in innovation. You need people who are willing to make that change, that are really believers in what you do. And the only way to know if they're continuously still a part of that organization in such a way, you have to ask them all the time. You have to build those relationships. And so, with that, in this particular example, we did include the staff as partners. We did do surveys along the way and say, hey, how do you feel about this experience? Because even as an operations leader, you have to know that your operations cannot kill your staff, right? So if you come up with some crazy process like, oh, it's good, it's going to save us a bunch of money. If your staff doesn't want to do it, you'll have high turnover, you'll lose your retention, and that has other implications on your business. So it's the key to be mindful of that employee satisfaction and making sure that your process is not damaging that along the way.
That's so key. And as I was listening to you say that just now, it reminded me of the show Undercover Boss, and
Mm-hmm.
how when the folks at the top, when they actually go undercover and work with the frontline employees, the people who are actually doing the work, and that's when they realize how onerous many of their processes are, and just how inefficient things can be sometimes. And they're making these directives blindly a lot of times without that employee participation that you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Maria, as we're unfortunately coming to a close, you and I could go on for easily 2 hours about this. But before we
Absolutely.
close, are there some resources that you can recommend where people who might be listening to this right now say, okay, well, I get it. I understand it now. I'm clear on what operations is and why it's so important and why I need to have someone who can overlook the operations, especially if you're not an incredibly detailed person. Do you
Mhm.
have any recommend resources that you could recommend for people who may be looking to learn even more about this topic?
Yes, I actually do. So I have a couple of resources, one being a very short 2-minute video on what is the COO. This will be kind of a reminder of today's discussion. It's available on Vimeo. It's called What is the COO by Lisa Zebi. In addition, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn Learning. There is a video by Dr. Richard Choa, and it's called Operational Excellence Foundations. That's going to tell you, like, what does a COO really do? It's a lot of complexity there. It's about an hour and 15 minutes or so, but it will really explain all of the things at a very high level that your COO does for the company. And last but not least, I have two very connected pieces of reading information. So, authors Stephen Miles and Nathan Bennett, they
Mhm.
have a book called Riding Shotgun, The Role of the COO. And then they also have a very short read, which is kind of a shorter version of that. It's published by the Harvard Business Review. It's called The Second in Command, The Misunderstood Role of the Chief Operating Officer. And with those two reads, you really get to understand why there is variation with various COO roles. You get to understand the necessary relationship between, or partnership and trusted partnership between the COO and the CEO. And so that really goes into detail and explains why there is variation amongst all COOs, because no COO role is exactly the same. And it really details the why of that moving forward.
Well, Maria, this has been absolutely awesome. I knew it would be. I knew you would share a wealth of information, and I'm just so appreciative. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor to be on the show.
Now, for those who are listening, they may be wondering, oh my gosh, Maria is just, she's the bomb. Like, how can I get in touch with her? How can people get in touch with you, Maria?
Yeah, so you can check out the Nerdy Industry website. Nerdyindustry.com. I can be reached via email at Maria, Maria, at nerdyindustry.com.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. And what I'd like to do at this moment is just kind of quickly recap some of the key takeaways from this interview, at least as I see it. And let's start off with defining what operations actually is. Operations, as Maria has said so eloquently, is the core of your business. It is the most overlooked aspect of a business, unfortunately. And I love the analogy that you used to the anatomy, our anatomy, and how operations is like our skin, in that it literally holds everything together. It touches every aspect of our businesses. And operations is the how of what you do. Another thing that I really appreciated that you talked about, Maria, is just defining what a COO, what that actually really means. And it's not only just being the chief of operations, but also the chief of business continuity. The COO is also known as the second in command, the number two. Sometimes it's also called the wingman. um,
Absolutely.
and, I also like the fact that you said that the COO, or anyone who is in charge of operations, these are the people who really are the innovators of execution. How are we going to continue to manifest this vision that has been laid out by the CEO? You also gave a very cautionary warning when it comes to operations and why it's so important when you said, if you can't deliver your product or service, you will not retain a client. It can't get clearer than that, folks. And thank you so much again for sharing that example about your client, the food service company, and some of the key metrics that you use to help them improve their operations and to be able to respond so quickly to this coronavirus pandemic. And I'm sure it will prepare them for future events because, as we all know, the longer you stay in business, things will go wrong. Whether it is internally or externally and completely out of your control, things will require constant attention and constant improvement and innovation. And again, just to quickly recap, those metrics that you mentioned were customer satisfaction and the fact that you recommend scoring that on a 3-point scale. You also talked about quality control and making sure that your product and or service is consistently delivered. And then I thought it was really key that you mentioned employee satisfaction and that your employees are actually your committed partners in innovation. This was excellent. Thank you so much, Maria, again. And If you want to reach out to Maria and learn more about what she's doing at her amazing company, Nerdy Industry, as well as what she has going on through her involvement at the COO Forum, definitely reach out to her at nerdyindustry.com. That's N like Nancy, ERD like dog, Y, industry.com. You can also email her at maria@nerdyindustry.com. As a reminder, we will have links to all of these great resources that Maria was kind enough to share with us in the show notes at businessinfrastructure.tv. Again, that's businessinfrastructure.tv. Do you have a question that you'd like for me to answer live on the show? Send me a direct message on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram with your question, and I'll make sure that I get back to you with a response. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues with Alicia Butler-Pierre. If you like what you've heard, do us a favor and subscribe, leave a rating and review, and more importantly, share with your colleagues and team members who could benefit from the information. Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler-Pierre.